and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the one and only Rock and Wrestling Podcast. Glorious. No, I won't give in. I won't give in till I'm victorious. And I will defend. I will defend. From far and wide and light years away, cast from the shadows and I light my way. You think you know me? I'm just a sexy boy. Oh, I'm not your boy toy. I'm just a sexy. I am a real American. Fight for the rights of every man. Without further ado, from parts unknown, your host with the most,
All right, we're back for a second time this week, a special bonus episode with Mark Kapani, formerly known as Muhammad Hassan in the WWE. I sat down with him this past weekend and just really chatted about his start in the business, kind of his really fast rise to the top of the card. And when, looking back as I was listening on the interview, it's surprising, he worked with pretty much all the top guys there. I mean, he worked with Hogan, Michaels, Taker, Jericho. He did a segment with Stone Cold. I mean, pretty much he worked with everybody. And then we just kind of talked about the origins of the character, kind of what it was like in the climate in the WWE at that time, and then finally why he decided to call it quits and what he's up to now. So it's great. Some of you may have heard him a few weeks ago on Why It Ended with Robbie E. and Matt Coon. Matt Coon going to be an upcoming guest right here on the Rock and Wrestling Podcast in just a couple of weeks. So he was a great interview. Super, super good guy. So I'm excited for you guys to hear this. It's cool to find out about kind of guys like this. We've kind of had a couple of like the Patriot, Just Incredible. What are they up to now? They have that shining moment and then it's gone. So where are they now? It's kind of fun to do that. And that's kind of the premise of this podcast is like I've talked about in yesterday's episode that I wanted to encompass both rock and heavy metal and pro wrestling. I also want to, when it comes to the pro wrestling side, encompass not just, the big time stars, but up and comers, independent guys that you may have never heard of, but have a terrific story. I still think one of the best episodes in the archives, episode 5 with Royce Isaacs, was a phenomenal episode and a great interview. And, most people aren't going to be reaching out to tell their story like that, but that's what I want to do on here is tell guys stories like that are on the independent scene out there working hard and creating some buzz. Flip Gordon is another one. Look at what he did at the All In press conference. It's cool that I got to sit down with him in the Bay Area a couple of months ago and chat with him. So I think that this is kind of what I want to, a broad scope. It's not just who can get the biggest name I can get. Sometimes the biggest name may not have the best story. The best story is the guy that's going to captivate and entertain you and may be just a regular independent wrestler. Our very first guest, Sir Samurai, was a terrific interview and a terrific guest, and we just talked about wrestling and what he's done in the business. And not, really what I want to do is help these guys reach a broader audience telling their story. So you got to think about that. I'm going to cover everything from independent wrestling at the lowest level to guys in ROH, to guys at StarCast, which I mentioned yesterday on the show. We'll talk about a little bit more about that here in a second. But I'm really trying to cover a broad scope when it comes to rock, metal, and pro wrestling, not just limit myself to how big a star was this guy. I'm not doing this for fame or anything. I'm doing this because I generally love this stuff, and this has been a creative outlet and a blast for me, and I'm having so much fun with it, whether it be over the phone or in person. So I'm not trying at any rate to get famous off this or try to get rich, any of that. No, I'm just doing this for the pure love and everyone that's supporting and listening out there, I appreciate. So as I mentioned a moment ago, and as I mentioned yesterday, the big announcement this week, obviously back on Sunday with All In selling out in about 30 minutes, the wrestling podcast convention called Starcast. I am going to be a part of that with my podcast. I'm going to be on Podcast Row, getting the opportunity to interview everybody. I'm not going to go through every single guest that's on there, but DDP, Lex Luger, Kevin Nash, X-Pac, Bruce Pritchard, Eric Bischoff, everybody, Cody Rhodes, the Bucks, Jay Lethal, they're all going to be there. It's like an independent WrestleMania. It's going to be huge, and I'm excited to be a part of that. I'm going to be talking about it on every episode all the way up till there. I'm going to be giving you some good content when I'm in there in Chicago for All In, which I have tickets to as well. So it's going to be great. It's going to be a hell of a weekend to celebrate pro wrestling, and it's exciting that, this first time in 20 years, something outside the WWE is going to be in an arena in America, in a 10,000-seat arena. It's incredible. It's something outside the WWE machine, so it's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be some great talent there, and it's going to be a blast. I'm looking forward to meeting other podcasters out there because it's just going to be a blast. There's some great live shows. There's a Monday Night War panel with Eric Bischoff and Bruce Pritchard at the event. There's a live What Happened When Monday. There's the roast of Bruce Pritchard, Why It Ended with Robbie E. There's an NWO panel, a Death of WCW. I mean, it's going to be, my head may explode from just pure excitement waiting for Labor Day weekend to come, because there's just going to be some great stuff that weekend. So I'm super excited about it. It's going to be really, really a blast to be out there and a great opportunity. Remember, once again, to follow on the Twitter machine at Nick's RW Podcast, as well Instagram, Rock and Wrestling Podcast, Nick's Rock and Wrestling Podcast on Facebook, also Rock and Wrestling Podcast at gmail.com. YouTube, I'm a little behind, but I will get the YouTube videos up here shortly in the next week. So all of that over at ProWrestlingTees.com/Rock and Wrestling Podcast store. Help a brother out. It's my birthday week. Need the money for Chicago, so help a brother out. And anybody that gave me a birthday shout out, wish me a happy birthday, want to say thank you to everybody. Much appreciated. And hopefully some of you I will see at the Starcast / All In weekend in Chicago. But as I mentioned yesterday on the show, want to give another shout out to a former guest on the show, Andrew Arch. As I mentioned, I loved his interview and great to tell a story, but he's got his own promotion running right here in Northern California, and if you're in the Northern California area, you need to go and check this out, because they're back after a year and a half. They're better than ever, and we got some great young talent from the Northern California area that's going to be on this show. We got the VCW show with the VCW North American Grand Champion, Christian Sky. He's going to be taking on the greatest foe to come after that title, none other than the GM's hand-picked opponent, Nathan Brick. Stockton's favorite son, Andrew Arch, podcast alum right here on the Rock and Wrestling Podcast. He's going to take on the King of Air Warfare, Matt Fury. We're going to find out who the best is in Port City. Not only that, we've got some tag team action. The VCW Tag Team Champions, the Thunder League, they're going to be in action when they defend those coveted titles against the Fallout Boys, EZRA, and Just Zach. It's going to tear the house down. And then you've also got D-Rogue, Mateo Gonzalez, Isaiah Singh, Big MF, Matt Freeman, and a ton more local talent right here in Northern California. Don't miss this event, June 9th. Only $10. Doors are open at 5. Show begins at 6. Get out there to Stockton for the VCW show. Help a former Rock and Wrestling Podcast guest, Andrew Arch, sell that place out. Check it out if you're in the Northern California area, June 9th. Do it. Do it now. So, coming up on the other side, Mark Capani, formerly known as Muhammad Hassan. Okay, I am here with my guest, Mark, or formerly known as Muhammad Hassan in the WWE. I appreciate you joining me on the show, man.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
So what I always like to do to start off is kind of find out a little bit how you got into pro wrestling, if you were always a fan or if it was just something that came along and it was you jumped into. Were you always a fan, and then how did you start in wrestling?
Yeah, I always was a fan of wrestling. I used to watch when I was a kid. I mean, I grew up on Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, the Iron Sheiks, and Sgt Slaughters, Randy Savage. And then I stopped watching for a little while when I was in high school. And then when I was in college, I went to the University of Buffalo. That was right around the time of the WCW, WWF wars, Monday Night Wars. And my roommate, who was a friend of mine from back home, was a huge wrestling fan. So he kind of got me back into wrestling. And it was at a great time. I mean, that was when, The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, their feud was just starting and Triple H was becoming popular. And so watching it in college, I think that's when it first kind of clicked that this might be something that I wanted to do. Didn't really know how to go about it. So, that was not to date myself, but right around the time when using the internet to research became pretty popular. And I found OVW as one of the kind of starting grounds of the camps for WWE, and read about some of the guys that were down there. I think it was right around when John Cena and Randy Orton just got down there, and Brock Lesnar, and just kind of decided to pick up and move from Buffalo to Louisville. And then I started in their Saturday class, which I think he paid like couple $100 a month to train with Nick Dinsmore and Rob Conway and Danny Davis, and that just eventually it progressed. It took some time, and going to shows and setting up the ring and breaking down the ring, and a couple of us would go in on Tuesday nights and we would be practice dummies for John Cena and Matt Morgan and some of the bigger names that they brought down there, and ultimately, when WWE kind of came and took everybody, they needed some new talent, and that's when I got my chance on TV. Jimmy Cornette gave me my chance as Mark Magnus, who eventually joined the Revolution, which was the big heel stable down there. So, but yeah, I mean, always been a wrestling fan. Never really saw myself doing it when I was younger, but that kind of changed when I got into college.
Awesome. So when you got to OVW, they weren't owned by the WWE at that time. It came later when you got there.
No, they were owned by the WWE. When I got there, that was I mean, I don't know how long they had been at the time, but I went there specifically because what I was reading on the dirt sheets was that this was like the AAA ball club of the WWE. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be in those classes. They practiced every day, but I knew that this would be around the place I wanted to be if I ever had a chance at making it to the WWE.
So you went with that strict mindset of I'm going to go to OVW, I'm going to get to WWE. You didn't look anywhere to go like independently and work around the world or anything. You went straight for the home run.
No. I went down there because I knew that that's where there was good training taking place. I mean, OVW wasn't owned by the WWE for any reason. It was because they had excellent trainers and an excellent program. And obviously anybody I think who gets into wrestling, professional wrestling, wants to be in the WWE. That's the big show. This was around, I believe, when I went down there. I'm pretty sure that's when WCW folded, and I think it was right around the same time. I might have been down there for a little bit when that happened. So WWE was the only show in town. But no, I mean, I did indies for a couple of years before I made it to the WWE in and around Kentucky and Ohio and Tennessee. But yeah, I mean, I definitely went down there with the mindset, that was my dream, dream big, and let's just see what happens.
Awesome. So when you get there, how was obviously Danny Davis and Jim Cornette were running it at the time. How was working with both of those as trainers with so much knowledge they have?
Excellent. Danny, I mean, Danny was day-to-day operations. Danny, his week was consumed with that TV show. I mean, Danny was the head trainer when I had gotten down there, but Danny also spent a lot of time producing and editing and distributing that TV show because OVW had a weekly TV show that aired. And so he had trained some of the guys that were then training me, like Nick Dinsmore and Rob Conway. And Jimmy Cornette comes in when you're on TV or when you're doing house shows to build and develop characters, and he is excellent at doing that. And they're both great agents as far as setting up matches and teaching you in-ring psychology, which I think is such a lost art these days as far as telling a story and painting a picture and working a body part and making it believable. So the fans, even though they know what they're watching isn't necessarily real, they suspend their disbelief for the time you're in the ring. So they were old school, and I think I was really blessed to be trained old school, because I see, you know, a lot of guys who came up after me that didn't have that luxury.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point that I'd love to get your opinion on. You say that you learned kind of the storytelling aspect. What do you think about today's product where there's not so much storytelling and it's more, look at these moves I can do?
It's fun to watch. It's acrobatic. You know, I was just watching something on that popped up on one of my feeds that was really interesting. It was, you know, it's a great show. It's, you know, there's definitely an audience for it, and people like to watch it. The difficult thing is fans have access to so many different styles of wrestling these days. It's much easier. Everything's digital. Everything's online. It's hard to go back to selling that story without them calling bullshit. And that's the irony of wrestling is, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, a body slam was a finish and everybody would gasp and they would think that, oh my God, you know, how's he going to get up? And nowadays guys are jumping through lit tables, you know, light them on fire, jump through them, land head first on the concrete, and the audience sits back and goes, it's phony, it's fake. So I have, you know, a lot of respect and appreciation for the new style. Like I said, it's entertaining to watch, but it doesn't, to me, it just doesn't sell as much. The crowd might ooh and ah at those high spots, but as far as being sucked into the match and sucked into the story, they're more popping than they are actually being emotionally engaged, which was something that I was always into as a wrestler. I mean, I cried when, you know, Andre ripped Hogan's chain off his neck, and you just don't have that anymore, that emotion, because it's all high spots. And then, you know, something that I was told early in my career is you're not going to be able to do that for 20 years. And a lot of those guys, a lot of those kids that are doing that now, they're going to feel it when they get to be my age. And I was fortunate that I wasn't in the business long enough to really have too many lasting injuries. But, man, I watch some of these guys and the way they're landing and think, oh, shit, like they're going to be in a wheelchair.
Exactly. Well, my favorite growing up was Stone Cold, and I'm like, Stone Cold was not the technical wrestler, but, man, he told stories that emotionally invested me as a fan.
Exactly. And there's a lot more character development, and I think something that is and I'm not going to speak out of turn because I don't know, I'm not up there, but something that I see lacking is allowing wrestlers to develop the characters on their own and bring their own personal touch. Everything it's become very systematic and packaged and deliberate that there isn't as much room. I mean, you know, some guys still do it. I know CM Punk was doing it a few years ago, which I thought was really cool. And I've seen a lot of guys the older guys that can still bring out their personality and develop their own characters, but you don't see a ton of it. And I think that the fans are kind of, again, it's a different audience than it was years ago, but they're I guess more used to those packaged characters that are just canned responses, and they kind of run through the motions of the XYZ of how to get heat or how to get over.
Exactly. So as you're in OVW, how did the Muhammad Hassan character kind of, the origins, and how did it come about? How was it pitched to you that it was going to be?
It was pitched to me. It came from, as far as I know, because I've actually remember, you know, at the time I was 23 years old, and I was, yes sir, whatever you need me to do. So I wasn't involved in the behind the scenes working of the character when it first came out, when they first conceived the idea of having a modern day, you know, Arabic heel. As far as I know, that came from the WWE, came down to OVW through Jimmy Cornette, who then started to develop it through the Mark Magnus character that he had been developing for me, changing Mark Magnus to Muhammad Hassan. The story was I lose, get pinned by both Nick Dinsmore and Johnny Jeter. My valet, I had a valet at the time, she leaves me. I disappear off TV for 4 months, and when I return on OVW TV, I found myself as this Arabic character with Sean Davari, who they had brought in. We tried a lot of different things with the character. We did, I wasn't on OVW TV too long as Muhammad Hassan. They kind of pulled me up pretty quick and had me doing house shows, trying to figure out where to go. And we did everything from, I'm raising the prices of your oil to, they even wanted me to talk with an accent at first. And eventually the character just kind of developed into this, which I think was brilliant, an Arab American who is marginalized and treated like a second-class citizen. Those vignettes, when I first started, when we made them, the tone of them, it wasn't really heel, but the reaction of the crowd, they got more aggressive as we progressed through them. But, that character, it really kind of developed based on crowd reaction, which was pretty cool. And then Sean and I did have a lot to do with developing our own characters, specifically based on, what Sean was going through at the time as a young, he's Persian American, but the racism and the prejudice in this country as it was today, it existed then as well. And it was pretty startling to see him get randomly searched at every airport we went through.
That is wow, that is crazy. I knew Davari was Persian, but you guys, obviously he probably took a lot of the heat with the character because obviously being from that region of the world, he would obviously probably get more heat than maybe you did.
Well, my last name's Kapani and his last name is Davari. And they might say that there was no profiling going on at the time, but it wasn't a coincidence that Sean was always the one that was stopped. And sometimes we were almost late. We almost missed flights. He got flagged 75% of the time. I did once in a while, but mine was probably more random. But, my last name, as it appears on my passport and on the ticket, is very much an Italian name, whereas his is very much from the Middle East.
Wow, that is very interesting to hear and even consider that would still, could be still going on today.
It is still going on today. I'm sure things have changed, but I think the character today is just as relevant. And I haven't done interviews in a long time, and I've been doing more recently, and kind of reminiscing and talking about my experiences 13 years ago. It's a little sad to think that we haven't come too far as a country after all we've been through.
Exactly. So one of the things you mentioned were the vignettes, and I did some research and I went back and watched those because you were at a time where they didn't do vignettes. So did it feel kind of cool that hey, I'm getting these vignettes to kind of preview me? Because I wish they would do more of that to introduce characters to the audience.
Yeah, it was. That was one of my first experiences as being a, in quotes, superstar, where they flew us to Connecticut. We got to tour the WWE headquarters. We got to stay in a fancy hotel. I was working at Chili's in Louisville and, getting my butt kicked daily in OVW practice, just a couple months before that. And now I'm staying in a nice hotel touring WWE facilities, the center of attention when we're producing those vignettes. It was really cool. It's hard to remember. I don't think at the time we really ever discussed wow, we're going to be big. This is going to be big. It was moment to moment, and trying not to let that moment slip away because everything in the WWE, at least to us, felt fleeting. It could be there one minute and it's gone the next. And ultimately that's what happened. But even at the time, you don't really have too much thought into the future. You're just very focused on the present.
Awesome. So one of the things I've been curious, obviously, because you're playing this very controversial figure, did you get, obviously, drawing back to the Sgt Slaughter character in '91 where he was getting death threats, did you get a lot of that backlash, whether it be death threats, hate mail, anything at the time?
Yeah, we did. I don't think we got nearly as much as Sgt Slaughter did, or even the Iron Sheik. It was a different era. I think people were smarter, understood a little more, and there wasn't as much. Kayfabe had been broken. A lot of people knew I wasn't Arab. I think a lot of the heat, what I can remember, the most heat we got, it came from other Arab Americans who felt like we were doing a disservice to them, who knew I wasn't Italian, who I remember a situation, and this is actually not an Arab American, because it was in Australia, I believe, but a group of young Arab men approached Davari and I very upset because we were out drinking. And they were like, Muslims don't drink. And they, again, when the character ultimately got taken off of TV, it wasn't as much about the pushback from Americans, from the media and sponsors, as much as it was about Arab Americans and how they felt that this portrayed them negatively.
Exactly. I think, that was the crazy thing is when I was watching it, I was in high school and I was like, okay, you can clearly see that he's not Arab. So there's the different generational things where, at that point, kayfabe was starting to go and you kind of went, all right, this is just a storyline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And most people did.
One of the angle I remember the most was the Hulk Hogan WrestleMania 21, and then him and Shawn Michaels teaming up against you and Daivari the next one. How was it like? Now you're in the ring with probably the biggest star of all time. How was it working with Hulk and Shawn Michaels?
I worked with Shawn a lot, and working with Shawn was always great. Shawn was just a great guy. Shawn was not intimidated or jealous or upset by anybody's push or anybody's position in the company. Shawn was Shawn Michaels, and he carried that company, and I think he kind of exuded that confidence, and he was very gracious and he was a great teacher. And working with Shawn in the ring was like going to class. I mean, he just, what I always say about Shawn is he is where you want him to be before you even know you want him to be there. He's just so intuitive. And Hulk Hogan Hulk doesn't have to do anything. He steps into the ring and he owns it, and he gets the biggest pop. And working with him, it was surreal. It was almost like an out-of-body experience where you're taking the big boot and he's throwing you over the top rope and you're hammering him in the back and you're chasing him around the ring. And it just, there were a few times where you just stop and you're like, holy shit, this is Hulk Hogan. I watched him slam Andre the Giant, at WrestleMania 3 when I was 8 years old. And, I still remember watching. I remember where I was when I watched it. I remember who I was watching it with. So it was surreal, and it was definitely a highlight of my career. But he was a great guy too. Hogan was great to work with, very warm, welcoming, easy to work with. He was definitely not difficult at all in the ring.
Oh, yeah, I've heard very good things about Shawn and Hulk. I think sometimes they get a bad rap from some guys, but a lot of the guys I've interviewed said they're nothing but a pleasure to work with.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the really interesting things is you were there during kind of, it's post-Attitude Era, but it's not quite the PG era. So the locker room is filled with guys like Hogan, Michaels, Undertaker, Triple H. How was that locker room at the time? Because obviously today, the locker room, obviously you maybe don't have as many veterans as maybe when you were there. How was the locker room kind of etiquette and run at the time when you were there?
Well, I don't know how it is now. I know when I was there, locker room etiquette is kind of something that you're trained, to follow. And at the time, there were two different locker rooms. It was Raw and SmackDown were separate shows, and it just depended on the veterans in the locker room. Raw had the Shawn Michaels and the Triple H's who really didn't put up with bullshit, and really they were just as involved in the production of the show as being the entertainers on the show. And so I felt like it was much more professional. If there were issues, they were handled more professionally. Then you go over to SmackDown, and SmackDown had veterans, and they had the Undertaker was on SmackDown, but the Undertaker was also the Undertaker. He was, he wasn't. I wouldn't. Undertaker was awesome. It was just different in the sense that there were more veterans in the SmackDown locker room that influenced the atmosphere, and there weren't enough veterans over there to kind of change that. And so SmackDown was more contentious, and there was a lot more issues in the SmackDown locker room at the time. I did not like the SmackDown locker room. I kind of grew into liking it, by the end of my career, but I don't know. I don't know how to answer that truthfully. There was definitely a lot of bullshit that went on, not just with me, but with a lot of other people. But there are also a lot of great things about that locker room. We would go out We'd go out drinking. We'd go out whenever we went to a city. We'd have fun. We'd tour. We went touring around Japan and Australia and Hawaii. I mean, you just make your friends and you stick with your friends and, hopefully you don't get noticed too much, and wait for things to blow over when there is heat, because everybody knows I got some heat in that locker room. But, it was up and down.
Oh, very cool. How was working? Obviously, Undertaker being the Undertaker, that was kind of your last angle there. He's a legend in the business. Was he nothing but the best to work with?
Yeah, he was working with him was very much like working with Shawn Michaels. It was like going to school. He was very, gracious, very easy to work with. He would, instructive. He was one of those guys. Again, he's the Undertaker. He's not, worried about anything. And that's what I mean. In the Smackdown locker room, he just didn't partake in any of the bullshit. He was above it all. But he was awesome to work with. It was the first ever appearance I ever had in the WWE was in Louisville, Kentucky, in a dark match when I was still part of the Revolution, and I ran in, tried to interfere with the Undertaker's match, and he chokeslammed me and gave me the last ride. And then to bookend that, the very last thing I ever did in the WWE was at the Great American Bash in Buffalo, where up on the stage, the Undertaker chokeslammed me and gave me the last ride through the stage. So I'm very proud to say that the beginning and the end of my WWE career was with The Undertaker, who is, one of the true legends in the history of the business.
Oh, that is a very cool story to start with Taker and bookend Taker. After you get done with the Hassan character, were there plans to maybe repackage you as something else?
Maybe. Not immediate. I know, I knew that I wasn't going to be back for a while when I was in the process of buying a home, and I had asked the head of talent relations at the time, just be honest with me, I'm about to buy a house. And he's like, don't buy the house. I think that character was really, I can't think of very many characters that had such an impact in such a short period of time. It would have been hard to come back and try to repackage. And I don't know how many ideas they may have had. I remember Triple H saying to me, his idea was just to have me say, I don't know what all this. I'm Mark Capani from Syracuse. They made me do this character to really kind of just be honest about it. I don't think that was, ever really in the works. But I at the end of it, when that character got taken off, it was such a huge blow. I needed some time to recover, and I wasn't beating down the writers' doors. And I had been told a few times that it's going to be a long time before they bring you back. So, get comfortable wherever you are.
Yeah, because then shortly after that, you decided to kind of retire. Did you kind of figure, I'm kind of done? Basically, I had that character, or did you ever think about, there's other options out there, whether it be a TNA and a Ring of Honor, or was it just like, I ended with The Undertaker, I had a good run there, I'm going to call it a day?
Well, I was 25. I think at that point, I just wanted to try something else. I mean, that is a huge roller coaster ride to go from, spending the last 4 years in Louisville, training every day of your life, I mean, watching tape, punching, pretending to punch the walls. I mean, working out, practicing, working a real job, because I wasn't signed by the WWE until the last year, getting to your goal and having it come crashing down in front of you. I just needed a timeout. I didn't know if I was going to stop wrestling for sure back then. I just knew I wasn't going to do it for a little while, and I wanted to try something different. So not that I would never have considered at the time doing those shows, but, I had other things that came up, and eventually I everything kind of had changed. And by the time I had caught up with me, I didn't feel the need to step back into the ring.
Awesome. And then before we finish up here, obviously you're in education. Myself, I am a teacher, so I just kind of wanted to get a quick little, how did you get into education after wrestling?
I had a lot of family in education. I had went to school originally for history. Not a lot. What's that?
That I got a history degree as well.
Yeah, and there's not a lot you could do with history, but teaching was always something that was, on my mind as a backup. And when I had moved back to Syracuse, which is where I'm from, I went back to school, and when I'm looking at my options, that was really the only thing that I found. And one of the things I really loved about being in the WWE, I wasn't supposed to sign autographs. I wasn't supposed to be warm and friendly in person, but I would always sign them for kids, and I would always take pictures with kids. And, that's just, I've always had a natural inclination to want to help young people. And so I would break kayfabe, and I would do it for kids regardless. And so when I was looking at choices, when I thought about what I wanted to do, was I'm driving across the country back home, because I lived in LA at the time. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to do something that made a difference. Maybe not the greatest salary in the world, but I don't measure success based on my my paycheck. It's having that ability to work with young people and influence their lives in a positive way, and hopefully they don't make some of the mistakes that you've made or your friends have made. And it's great to see when they succeed. And so I very much enjoy what I do now.
Awesome. That is incredible. So real quickly, I just happened to take the thought that you returned to the ring recently for a match.
Yeah, I'll do appearances once in a while. I'll do signings. I've been doing some interviews, and in the interviews, just like this one today, it's I haven't wrestled in 13 years. I'm not going to wrestle again. I said I'm not going to wrestle again in one of them, and then I think when I got to the appearance and started talking to the promoter and some of the workers, he's like, hey, he left it completely up to me, which I was happy because it was my decision, and I got to be comfortable with it. He's like, if you want to do a match, do a match. Like, man, you just want to run in there and hit your finish, run in there, hit your finish. You don't have to do anything. What do you want to do? And so I sat down with the guys, and we started talking. It's like, you know what? It's been 13 years. Let's see what I can do. I still work out. I'm not nearly as good a shape as I was when I was 24, but, for pushing 40, I'm not bad. And, I just got in there, and it's funny to see, the kids liked it at school, and they popped pretty big. And, I've seen some things since about comebacks, but it wasn't about making a comeback. I'm not, looking to make a comeback to wrestling at 38, especially with where I am now in my life, but it was very cool, and it was very fun. And it was definitely, something that I enjoyed, to be able to put my gear on and to go out there and to just wrestle in front of a crowd. I mean, how many people have, can do that? And so, will I do it again? I might. It's not going to be too often, but I might do a couple more. Nothing again. I'm not doing it every weekend, and I'm not leaving my career to make a comeback, at my age, but it was fun. And that's the only word that I could think to describe it. After 13 years of not being in the ring, it was just fun to get out there and relive it a little bit.
Awesome. And one final question. What was your favorite match you've ever had in your career?
It's tough, man, because how do you measure a favorite match? I've asked that often, and I think I have a different response almost every time. I mean, of course, Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan. I mean, how do you top that? But, man, I had some really fun matches at house shows with Chris Jericho. I had some great matches with Johnny Jeter, who's one of my best friends in OVW that I used to love to work, because we lived together. We spend weeks setting up the match and then go out there and act it out. It's a tough question because, everything is different, and they're different, how do you measure it? But as far as milestone careers, having fun in the ring, being just in awe of where I am and what I'm doing, it's Shawn Michaels, Madison Square Garden with Hulk Hogan coming in at the end.
Wow, that's you can't beat that.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, once again, I appreciate you joining me today, man. I really appreciate all the good stuff, and I'm glad to hear, you made a little comeback into the ring, but also you're doing good in education and such like that. A lot of guys struggle after getting out of wrestling, finding something, so it's great to hear that you're doing good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Nick.
So, thank you, man. I really appreciate you joining me on today's show.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
All right, I want to thank Mark once again for joining me on today's show. Great conversation. Loved to hear everything about the genesis of the Muhammad Hassan character, how he got exactly into pro wrestling, and all of the great stories he had. How much Hulk was a great guy, Undertaker was a great guy, and then finally just kind of why he walked away when he did. Phenomenal interview and great guy. If you want more from not Muhammad, but Mark, definitely go check out Wide Ended with Robbie E. and Matt Kuhn. That's another great podcast, part of the MLW Radio Network, along with Something to Wrestle With, What Happened When, all those great podcasts. Go check it out. If you want more, he goes into a little bit deeper conversation with those guys. So definitely check that out. Once again, like I said, I support all podcasts, not just my own. So definitely go check that out. Sam Roberts is one I've really gotten into lately. Stone Cold's got a great one. Jericho is always. So there's a ton of wrestling podcasts out there. A ton of music ones too. So definitely go check any of them out. Support them any way you can. As I mentioned earlier, I will be at StarCast, part of All In Weekend during Labor Day weekend out there in Chicago. It's going to be a blast. Remember to follow the podcast on Twitter, Nick's RW Podcast, Instagram, Rock and Wrestling Podcast, Facebook, Nick's Rock and Wrestling Podcast, Rock and Wrestling Podcast at gmail.com. Over at Pro Wrestling Tees, get your Rock and Wrestling Podcast t-shirts and tank tops from the Rock and Wrestling Podcast store. Make sure you rate this podcast on iTunes. Give me 5 stars and a wonderful review. If we hit a little landmark, maybe I'll drop some bonus content and maybe another bonus episode if we can get some reviews. So definitely go out and give a 5-star review on iTunes. So yesterday's episode, we talked a lot about rock and metal. Today we talked a little bit more pro wrestling. Obviously with Mark, we talked kind of the genesis of his character and his short time in pro wrestling. And what I want to spend a little bit of time here wrapping up today's show and this week's kind of back-to-back episodes is kind of, I'm going to steal from Sam Roberts here a little bit and talk kind of about the state of pro wrestling, but I'm not going to focus on WWE. Really what I'm focusing on are, well, we'll say this one. I think there's 2 top stories this week, and I'm going to it's kind of the state of pro wrestling, but I'm going to talk maybe the 2 top stories in wrestling this week. And now freestyle, I may throw a third one in there as I remember, but I think 2 top stories. I think number 2 top story of the week is the Roman Reigns project. Now, I'm not going to spend a very lot of time on this, but it's the Roman Reigns project. And from everything that I have read on so-called dirt sheets and internet rumors, as they're trying to position Roman Reigns as an underdog and use the Daniel Bryan story that they used for WrestleMania 30 and use it for Roman Reigns. It's not going to work, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. I'm giving straight up. I think it won't work for the fact of, Daniel Bryan truly was an underdog. He was not considered to be in that main event for WrestleMania. He was not in the Royal Rumble that year. And the fans' voices were so loud that WWE had to change it. And that was truly an underdog situation. You have a situation in Roman where he's getting opportunity after opportunity, and I don't think telling the story of management holding him down is going to work. I think the twofold they're trying to do is they figured that Jinder is disliked by so many people. Let's bring him to Raw and let's feud him with Roman. People will cheer Roman. I don't think it's going to work. We've already seen in a couple of weeks Jinder is getting cheered. So you're finding yourself in a pickle. I think the last resort, they have to finally turn him heel. I don't want to spend much time on the Roman Reigns, but I just think it's a top story because we saw again on Monday night where they're trying to position him as an underdog, but it was weird in the way it came off. Him spearing Jinder through the wall, it felt very heelish, and Jinder felt very babyface. So it's we're not sure where they're going. I'm hoping they're staying maybe away from crowning him Universal Champion and going with somebody like Braun. So that's kind of, story 2. I think story 2A would be the Ronda Nia Jax thing. I don't want to spend time on that. I think it's clear what they're doing. You can't have Ronda lose a qualifying for match for the Money in the Bank. You can't put her in a ladder match yet. She's only had 1 match. I think you put her in a title match with Nia Jax. And I think basically what they do here is they have Natalya interfere, and that sets up her real first feud. I think that's what that's going. But the big story of the week, in my opinion, is the All In situation. As I mentioned yesterday, I mentioned today, this is the first time in 20 years that a pro wrestling show outside of the WWE machine has sold out an arena. I don't care what anybody says, it's 10,000 seats. ECW, which was revolutionary, never sold that many. I think the most that they sold, they had a 6,000 seat event once, but I don't think that they even came close to that. So that is unbelievable. So think about that. 20 years since WCW was basically at its peak, there hasn't been anybody to sell out an arena. That in itself is an accomplishment. And the fact that there's no major promotion behind this, there's no WCW, there's no ECW, no NWA, AWA. It's all just Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks literally putting their money in and going all in for this huge opportunity. And I don't care what anybody says, the talent booked for this is phenomenal. From the Bucks, Cody, Omega, Jay Lethal, Chelsea Green, Tessa Blanchard. It's good. Rey Mysterio's booked on it now. I mean, it's good. I don't care what anybody says. It's gonna be really cool, and it's gonna have some vibes because I think it's gonna be a little bit more adult oriented show. It's gonna be different than the WWE. It's not gonna be under that banner of sports entertainment. It's gonna be under the banner of pro wrestling, and I think that a lot of people yearn for that. So it's gonna be good, and what's gonna be different is Ring of Honor. It's not gonna be seen so small like Ring of Honor. It's not gonna be so Japan based, which I think turns a lot of fans. Both of them have their, I wouldn't say negatives, but drawbacks that carry that large audience. This is gonna have that feel, and it's gonna be. I mean, the main event is going to be Cody Rhodes versus Nick Aldis, and Cody Rhodes is challenging for the NWA Heavyweight Championship, which I really hope he wins because that's cool to have a Rhodes, Cody doing what his dad did. That would be amazing. So that to me is just the biggest story, and not only that, Starcast coming with it. And I'm not doing this to blow smoke up anybody's butt because I'm going to be on Podcast Row. I would almost think about going, even if I wasn't, because there's so many events listed on there that are so great. Even if I didn't have tickets for All In, I would still go for Starcast. There's going to be tons of meet and greets. There's going to be tons of live shows to see. It's going to be awesome. There's going to be stuff going on at Pro Wrestling Tees in Chicago. It's going to be like a not a mini, it's going to be like an independent WrestleMania in Chicago during Labor Day weekend. It's going to be a blast. And I think highly advise anybody that's a pro wrestling fan to go. I think it'll be phenomenal. It's just going to be top-notch stuff, top to bottom, all weekend long. So I think it'll be really, really good. And I'm excited to see as they release more talent and they release more of the card, what it's going to be. I'm excited to see, what superstars could be at Starcast. It's going to be awesome. And I think it's just going to be very good and healthy for professional wrestling. I mean, what a time it is to be a fan in 2018. I mean, think about this. If you had told me, 29 years ago, like I said yesterday, that, hey, you're going to have a wrestling podcast. And not only that, you're going to be part of a wrestling podcast convention, and you're going to have the opportunity to sit down with, Eric Bischoff. Think about it. Eric Bischoff to me is crazy because WCW was the wrestling promotion that I got into, and he was running it at a time, and seeing him on TV was phenomenal. So, Ron Simmons, Nat, they're all going to be there, and the opportunity to sit down and interview just one of these guys will be huge, and I'm more than ecstatic about it. It's going to be a really, really good time as it gets closer. I'm going to lay down, I'll go over possibly one of the episodes upcoming who's going to be on there, the full list. You can go over to starcast.com right now and see all the podcasts that are on Podcast Row, all the live shows, all the superstars that are appearing. All In is great. I highly recommend that you get your hotels, everything with it right now, because this thing is practically sold out. There's pretty close to Starcast selling out, so it's going to be really, really good time. So I definitely highly recommend doing that and getting on it now. So, once again, want to thank Mark for coming on, formerly Muhammad Hassan of the WWE. I want to thank Jarvis yesterday. Heck of a week here for 2 episodes back to back. I really wanted to do this on my birthday week, and I had both these interviews locked and loaded. They were going to be consecutive weeks, but I got the opportunity for some bigger guests, so I gave it to you two for one this week on my birthday week. So Jarvis yesterday, Mark today. Remember to go follow the podcast on Twitter, Nick's R&W Podcast, Rock and Wrestling Podcast on Instagram, Nick's Rock and Wrestling Podcast on Facebook, Rock and Wrestling Podcast at gmail.com. Find it on YouTube, Rock and Wrestling Podcast. Also, remember, you can go to Pro Wrestling Tees and get yourself a Rock and Wrestling Podcast shirt. Rock and Wrestling Podcast store. Get yourself a tank top. Show off those guns for the summer weather that's coming up shortly. So it's going to be good stuff. Help a brother out, man. Got to have that money, drinking money for Chicago at StarCast. And finally, we want to go over the schedule for the upcoming week. So next week on May 23rd is going to be Dizzy Reed from Guns N' Roses, the keyboard player from Guns N' Roses. He's been in the band since about 1990. Going to talk all about his new solo album he's got coming up. It's going to be phenomenal. Guns N' Roses is my favorite band of all time. May 30th, we got the Podfather, the king of all podcasts, part of Something to Wrestle, Bruce Pritchard, What Happened When Monday, Tony Schiavone, and 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. Conrad Thompson himself, the man that's one of my main inspirations for starting this, is going to be on the podcast as we talk all about All In, StarCast, wrestling podcast, music, whatever he wants to talk about. All of that good stuff. The following week, June 6th, we'll crack open into June. We're going to have Matt Kuhn on the show, one of the friends of Conrad that does a lot of the music for that. So we're going to talk music, but we're also going to talk about his podcast he has with Robbie E. called Why It Ended. And we'll talk all about rock, wrestling, and music in general. June 13th, Brandon from Suburban Paranoia, and he's also putting on Devastator Fest, I believe, here in the Bay Area coming up this summer. We want to talk all about that. He's also a huge wrestling fan, so we're going to talk a lot about wrestling, music, all of that good stuff. So we've got Brandon June 13th. I'll recap. Let's go in order. Next week, Dizzy Reed on the 23rd. The 30th, Conrad Thompson. May 6th will be Matt Kuhn, and June 6th, I meant Matt Kuhn, and June 13th will be Brandon. So we got quite a packed up. Also got some other guests lining up for some interviews that'll be on future. Gotta wait to confirm them first, but it's gonna be some good stuff. I appreciate you guys listening every week on here to the Rock and Wrestling Podcast. Once again, thanks to Jarvis, thanks to Mark for joining me today. So make sure you subscribe on iTunes, listen, download, write a review. I'll hook you up. So I will see you next week right here with Dizzy Reed from Guns N' Roses on the Rock and Wrestling Podcast, and I'll see all of you at StarCast in Chicago.